Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Tracy Cook, and I'm the Online Media Manager for modernanalyst.com, the premier community for business analysts. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Stop Gathering Requirements. Today's featured speaker is Steve Blass, PMP, PMI, PBA, author, consultant, teacher, and coach. This webinar will last approximately 60 minutes, including the question and answer session at the end. Please be sure to submit your questions in advance using the questions feature of the GoToWebinar software. This webinar is also being recorded, and the recording as well as a PDF of the PowerPoint will be posted to the modernanalyst.com website within 2 business days. And now I'd like to introduce Steve Blass. Steve, please take it away.
Well, hello, and that's me up there, and that's information about me. And hopefully the picture isn't too frightening. With that, I'm not going to go over it. I'm embarrassed to do so. So let me proceed here. So here's the situation that we face as business analysts. This might sound familiar to you. You want people to show up at meetings so that you can get their requirements, because you were told to gather the requirements, and they don't show up. The exact people you want aren't there. You have a meeting or outside a meeting, and you have stakeholders from different areas of the business who are in conflict about the requirements, and you have to be the peacemaker, and you really wonder whether that was part of your job description to mediate about requirements. You're doing your due diligence, and you get your requirements document completed, and you want to get it done and passed and signed, and the stakeholders keep saying, well, not yet. No, not yet. We've still got to do some more work. We want to change some things, and we're still thinking about it. Next week. You can't get them to review it. When you do finally get the thing done and you pass it on to the solution team, the solution ends up with missing pieces. And they say, well, what about this? And you say, you didn't tell me about that. You suddenly want this thing and you didn't tell me about it. And they say back to you, you didn't ask. Perhaps you do a requirements review, and this might be also strike a familiar tone to you. Hours, you spend weeks putting together the requirements and talking to people and getting them down and collecting them all, and then you go to review them, and it takes hours. You've got 4-hour sessions over the phone, 8-hour sessions. Oh yeah, I don't know if you've ever had them, but they happen. 8 hours of a meeting on the phone to review the requirements line by line by line. And you say, well, as long as we're making them, adding new stuff and so forth, but the discussions are about words or order of requirements, numbering. And you probably have run into the situation where you've got the requirements and you're supposed to put them in priority order because it says so in the IEEE standards for requirements and in the ISO standards for requirements, and the requirements have to be prioritized. And you go back to get this prioritization from the stakeholders, and they say, yeah, they're all equal. Don't want them all. I'm not going to, or they just don't even want to do it at all. Maybe you've run into that. And you say, well, okay, what do you do about it? And so my answer is, well, stop gathering requirements in the first place. If you weren't gathering requirements, you wouldn't have to have any of those things. You wouldn't have meetings in which people didn't show up. You wouldn't have requirements that are in conflict if you're not gathering requirements. You wouldn't need a sign off if you don't have requirements to sign off. You wouldn't have to have requirements reviewed if you don't have requirements. So, the answer is stop gathering requirements. So what's gathering requirements all about? Well, back in the beginning, and I go back 50 years, when we started, we didn't go out and get requirements. We just went over and talked to the users. And the users at that time did not have their hands on a keyboard. They used reports that came from the computer, because we're talking about second and third generation computers, old mainframe IBMs, and it was all done with punch cards and so forth. And I would go and say, well, let's see the report that you want. They'd lay it out for me, and I'd say, okay, now what does this mean and what does that mean? And you sketch it out, and you come back with here is the printing from test data. What do you think? And they'd say, okay, fix this and this, and 2 or 3 times, and they'd say, yeah, that looks like it's good. And then we'd run it a few times to make sure it worked well. There were no requirements. After a while, we started getting requirements. Our process started formalizing. And so I started out before we had formal requirements documents. So gathering requirements started later, in the 70s, and you would find your boss, your manager, vice president sitting there saying, go find out what they want. They being the users, the business people. Go find out what they want. Or perhaps you have somebody saying to you, hey, you're a business analyst, go gather the requirements. How hard can that be? Right? Find out what they want. Just go talk to them and record what they say. Or perhaps, as I'm paraphrasing a classic joke that's been around for probably all 50 years, I'm sitting here coding. I'm getting the code done. Go find out what the requirements are. Go gather the requirements. Okay? So that assumes that there's something there to gather. That assumes that the requirements exist. You can't gather something that doesn't exist. You gather apples from trees. You gather flowers and put them in a basket. You gather fruit. You gather things that already exist. So how do you go about gathering requirements? Well, you go to the business community and say, hi, I'm Steve, and I'm here to get your requirements. So could you give me the requirements? And they may give them to you in various forms. They may verbally give them to you and you write them down, or they may give you a document with the requirements on them. Then you take it dutifully and put it in your basket, because you need a basket to gather requirements, right? You're not going to gather things and not have something to put them in. So you go around knocking on doors with the basket and you get the requirements, put them in the basket, and you try as best as you can, assiduously, to copy them exactly as they're giving to you, because after all, they're giving you requirements. Once you've done that, you've collected them, you reformat the requirements, because they've got to be in a requirements document. And so you do a little editing here and there, tighten it up a little bit, remove redundancy. People give you the same requirement, put some together, reorganize them so that they are in a nice organized way with all the bullet points and the 2.1.1 and all of that. And you get this nice, beautiful requirements document that is still exactly what they told you. And you go back and confirm it. You go to the ones who gave you those requirements and say, these are the requirements you gave me. Did I copy them down correctly? Does this match what you told me? Once that has happened and they say, yes, this is that, you copied it well, very good. Then you take them and give them to the solution team and they develop the solution. Gathering requirements. Okay, so you might say, well, Steve, what's wrong with that? I do it every day. Well, they get the problems and stuff, but that's how we do it. All right, what's wrong with that? The first issue is who's responsible for the requirements. The one nice thing about doing nothing but gather requirements is that you can take you don't have to take any responsibility for those requirements. They're not yours. They belong to business people. Well, if that's the case, and they do in fact belong to the business people because they have them first, They may not show up at meetings if they don't think they have requirements. Well, Steve's having a requirements meeting. I don't have requirements. I've got none of that formal stuff. I don't even know what requirements are. So, yeah, that's not for me. And so you start missing large segments. That part of the solution is missing because somebody didn't show up. If they own the requirements, you then have that battle. Alice over here wants 2,000 transactions a day, and Phyllis over there wants 4,000 transactions a day. And neither of them are willing to give up their requirement because they own it. It's their requirement. Now you've got to figure out a way of resolving it that they're not, it's their requirement. They own it personally. So you have a lot of people who own a lot of different requirements. That's not a good situation. Also, you go out and you say, can I have the requirements? And they give them to you. Well, what else you do need to do? Are there any other questions? Do you need to be adept at elicitation gathering? Is it to ask questions and conduct interviews and successful meetings? No. All you have to do is show up, make the appointment, show up on time, say, hi, I'm Steve, here to get the requirements. Okay, here are the requirements. Good. Ask the questions. Can you give me the requirements? Okay, just want to check. What do you mean by that word? Okay, got it. So you don't go into any in-depth to find out what's behind what it is that they want, because they're giving you the requirements as it is. Then when you're actually implementing, the solution team has questions, you have to go back to the people and ask them, well, what did you mean by this? And this doesn't seem to be quite right. And this doesn't work this way. That's an awful lot of time during implementation, going back and forth, back and forth. And what about agile and machines? We know we're constantly concerned about AI. And one of the things I've been telling business analysts for quite a while is, you are in a safe job. There's no way a machine can do your job. But if your job is nothing but gathering requirements, the 4 steps on the previous page, that can be done by a machine. The stakeholders, the users, can sit there and type their requirements into a form that, as it gets the requirements typed in, can actually ask questions about what's being typed in and clarify it, reformat it automatically, and then send it on to the development team. If the development team has a question, they type it in, it goes back to the users, reformatted, ask the question, and come back and forth, and you're out of a job. And if all you're doing is just gathering the requirements and passing them to the solution team, what would prevent the solution team from asking the users and stakeholders directly without your intervention? Because you did just give them exactly what the stakeholders said. You passed it directly on. What would they need you for? One of the things that I've seen in the annals lately is the term respect. And apparently business analysts do complain about not getting any respect. The customers don't respect us. They just look at us as somebody who takes up their time. And the solution team looks at us as somebody who isn't adding any value. And if all you're doing is writing down what the customers say as requirements, is it any wonder if after you've done a complete requirements document and handed them in, and if you're in agile, you just collect the user stories and hand them over to the development team and say, here it is. Well, yeah, remember in Agile, Scott Ambler, who was a leading Agilist, once said a BA stands for Band-Aid. There's no respect there, because the idea is that they're just going to go out and gather requirements. Doesn't sound all that good. So instead of a business analyst You might be called a requirements recorder. And why? Because of one simple thing. When you gather, there is no analysis being done. Your last name, assuming that you are a business analyst out there or who perform business analysis, the last name is analyst or analysis. Gathering requirements involves no analysis other than combining some requirements and checking for redundancies. We want to stop doing that. We want to put the analysis back into our process. But there's another factor that's perhaps even more important. And that is, if you are gathering requirements and your boss and your team and everybody says, go gather the requirements. And you say, well, Steve, yeah, that's just a term. Well, it isn't. Cognitive studies for years have shown that continual use of a certain language will cause your brain to act that way. So if you continually consider that you are a requirements gatherer, you will tend to simply gather requirements. You will tend to assume that the users and the stakeholders and the business have the requirements. All you have to do is go get them. Your job is to pull the requirements out of the stakeholders. So you have a meeting and you say that, oh, what a terrible meeting. They weren't forthcoming with the requirements. Well, I can't get them to come to meetings. I have requirements meetings and I can't get them to show up. Well, the truth is that they don't want requirements in the first place. And I can say this from experience, again, coming before requirements were actually a thing. Requirements are something that the stakeholders put up with. They don't have the time. They're doing accounts payable. They're selling goods. They're drawing things as artists. They're managing processes, putting out payroll. That's their job. And you say, yes, but we're going to make it better. We just want to find out what they're doing so we can make it better. We need their requirements. No, they don't have time for that. And remember what we said just a few minutes ago, many of them don't even know what requirements are. So you say, well, welcome to my requirements meeting. I'm glad you're all here. I'm here to have requirements. So what do you need? And you get stunned silence because they really don't know what to say. Remember who may show up at these meetings. You ask the manager to send people who know the system because you want to work with them for 2 hours a day for the next 2 weeks so that you can get the requirements done. The manager saying, oh boy, that's a full day's work. It's over a full day's work. That's 10 hours, 20 hours. 2 hours a day for 2 weeks. That's 20 hours of my time, somebody's time. I can't afford that. All right. So the manager gets the least productive or the newest person who hasn't really broken in yet because they're going to be the least lost to them. Obviously, those aren't the ones you want, but and so when they get to the meeting, you're asking questions and they say, well, I don't know. Let me go back and check. Many times they're forced into the situation. The boss says, go tell Steve what we want. And again, they don't want to do this. And there's always the situation that the subject matter expert isn't an expert in the subject matter, isn't an expert. I've had situations, one in particular, where I set up a meeting. I was told by the vice president to go talk to this guy. I'll call him George. And he's the expert in this crash dummy system we were doing. And so I made up the appointment, and I called him just ahead of time to say, is this still a good time? Can I see you tomorrow? So I go in. I go through the appropriate start, the appropriate introduction, the appropriate framing. I'm here to talk about the crash dummy system, and so we can get some information on it. Yes, that's good. Everything was going well. I started asking questions. I'd ask a question, he'd give me a vague answer and ask me a question. I'd answer the question with a certain amount of suspicion, and I'd ask him a question back, and he'd give me a vague answer and ask me a question. Finally, after a few minutes, I don't know how long, I said something about, do you know why I'm here? Or why we're having this meeting, or something like that. He said, sure, you're here to explain the crash dummy system to me. No, I'm here for you to explain the crash dummy system to me. You're the subject matter expert. He laughed and said, I'm not a subject matter expert. Fortunately, we laughed about it, and we had a bit of more conversation, some chats, and he turned out to be a champion for the project and was great help and really helped us get the project done, but he wasn't a subject matter expert, and it could have been a lot worse. So, they don't want requirements. The business people you're going to get the requirements from don't even want requirements. What makes you think they have requirements? And what do you think they do with requirements? Just think of this. The requirements have been signed off. 2 or 3 months later, the developers are ripping through the requirements and trying to write the code. What do you think those users who signed off on the requirements, who had all those meetings and those agonizing, teeth-pulling meetings where you asked questions and had debates and pulled the teeth to get those requirements, what do you think they're doing with that wonderful business requirements document? You're going to submit that document to the Nobel Prize for Business Requirements. What do you think they're doing with it? It's sitting under a table, balancing the table out, because they don't need it. They did it so that you can get what you need to take it to the team. So they don't want requirements. They don't know what requirements are. They don't have requirements. What is it that they want? They want a solution to their problem. That's it. No more, no less. They want a solution to the problem. That means you, as a business analyst's first requirement is to determine what their problem is. And you can't do that by simply walking up and saying, okay, so what's your problem? Because the likelihood is you're not going to get the right answer. They want a solution to the problem. That's your job. Your job is to define solutions, plural. Your job is not to come up with a single solution. And many times you and I know that what's given to us is, go do this. Get the requirements to do this. And the this is already a solution that somebody upstairs or somebody in the business has decided this is the solution to the problem. Now go find the requirements for it. As a business analyst, I might use that as a solution or not, but I'm going to go ask questions, gather information to determine what the real problem is, and then come up with multiple solutions. The one selected might be the one that was originally given. My job is to define solutions, define what is needed by the business to implement the solution they select. It's about defining the problem, defining the solution, because ultimately they don't have requirements, so there's nothing for you to gather. They don't know what they want. Half the time or more, actually, according to Gartner or Forrester or somebody like that, over 80% of the time they don't know what they want. They don't even know what the real problem is. They know symptoms and issues, but not the real underlying problem. That's what you as a business analyst have got to find out. Your job is to help them understand what the problem is, the real problem. Understand what really they want so that they say, yes, that's exactly, if you can give that to me, I'll name my firstborn after you. Say, thank you so much. You want them to realize what they really want. You're going to offer options. You're going to offer choices, develop multiple solutions and alternatives, suggest improvements and enhancements to what they're asking for and thinking about and how they do their business. You're going to ultimately increase the value of the business regardless of what they say, because they're not sure. Many of the times the problems are, they're just too close to the problems. As we know from real life, there's nothing different in business. So instead of gathering problems, as in gathering apples there, gathering requirements, what we're going to do is gather information. We're going to ask questions, conduct surveys, observe people in action, ask more questions, have meetings, brainstorming sessions, ask more questions. Get people to think differently about what they're doing and ask more questions. Continuously look for more information. None of that information may be requirements. Then we're going to confirm the information to make sure that, in fact, we understood the information correctly. I saw them doing that. This is what I think they were doing. Is that what they were doing? It was. Good. Okay. I'm just making sure. Did you not say this in that meeting? You didn't. What was it that you? Oh, that's what you said. Okay. Got it. Continuously. After every meeting, I'm going to confirm what we talked about in that meeting. No, we're not taking minutes. We're confirming the information we received. And in fact, to increase the information, decrease the gathering requirements, I'm no longer going to call it a requirements meeting or a requirements planning meeting or a requirements session. Consider this. If you are going to a meeting and the meeting is called a requirements meeting, what do you think the goal of that meeting is? To come out with requirements at the end. If you thought that, then clearly people who are coming to your requirements meetings are thinking the same thing. And that's why you're getting people not showing up, because they say, well, I got nothing to contribute to this set of requirements they're supposed to do. That's why they come armed to the teeth with their requirements to compete against the other person's requirements. Your meetings aren't successful because it's about requirements. I tell you what, instead of calling them a requirements meeting, call it an information gathering session. And I can give you one example where we changed, that's all we changed, just the title of the meeting. And the business analyst reported back to me that they had higher attendance, that when people were unable to come, they had sent somebody else in their place. People were showing up with documentation, procedures, manuals. The meetings went much better. People just were there. They talked. They gave information, because the information they were giving were not requirements, but just information, and everybody loves to talk about what they do. So the immediate reaction by simply changing the name to information gathering session from requirements anything makes people say, hey, I'm going to provide information. I can do that. And what could you argue about? Somebody says we do it this way. Somebody else says we do it this way. Cool, thanks. I know there's two ways of doing it, because neither of them are requirements. Gather the information, confirm the information, then we go through that information and we analyze it. We come up with conclusions, and then we confirm. Can we do it this way? Can we do it that way? Can we do it the other way? Remember this kind of watchword. Requirements do not exist until the business analyst analyzes them into existence. Let me repeat that for you. Requirements don't exist, so you can't gather them. They aren't there. They don't exist until you, as the business analyst, analyzes the information and puts them into existence. You, the business analyst, own the requirements. Now you don't have debates. They might debate with you, but you own the requirements. They're going to give you information because you're going to turn them into requirements. And ultimately, at the end of any given information gathering session, what you want to hear is somebody say, "Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. That was a good meeting. When are you going to come back with our requirements?" You're writing the requirements for the new system or process that's going to solve their problem, and you're going to do it for them. In other words, gather information about the business problem domain. Put things in perspective. Understand what they're doing. Analyze that information to understand what the real business problem is. Not what you were told was the problem, but what the real problem is. Remember again, the studies have shown that 80% or more than 80% of the time, what is given to you as a problem is not the real problem that needs to be solved. So you get to the end and you say, "Here's the system," and they say, "Oh man, that's a beautiful system. That is really lovely, and that's exactly what I asked for, but it's not what I need." And if you do exactly what they say to do, and you don't solve their problem, who gets blamed? You can't go back and say, "You didn't tell me. You gave me the wrong problem." Your job is to analyze the business, them, they are the business. You analyze the business to determine what the problem is and what the possible solutions are. That's what you're going to do, is analyze that information to define the real business problem. And once you have that, you're going to gather information about the business problem itself. What are the circumstances that cause that business problem? What are the conditions that exist that allow the problem to exist? What are the consequences to that business problem? It may be that the consequences turn out to be so minor that it's not worth solving. It may be that the problem is so intertwined that it can't possibly be solved once you determine what it is. It costs too much money. You take that problem back to the problem owner, and for every problem, there is a problem owner. Part of defining the problem is defining who the problem owner is. You gather information about that problem, you go back and say, "Is this the problem you want to solve?" Get confirmation on that. Now, once you have done that, you're going to analyze the information to define solutions to that problem. Notice the pattern. Gather information, analyze the information. Gather information, analyze the information. And it's a round and round process, an iterative process of gathering information and analyzing the information to produce different things. Now we're analyzing information about the business problem, the conditions, the circumstances, the problem domain, to come up with multiple solutions to the problem. We present these solutions to the business. They say, "That's what we want to do." Now, how you present them, you might kind of angle toward one particular solution. The solution might be obvious, but you want to present all possible solutions to show that this is in fact a problem, and there are multiple ways of doing this. They select the solution. You're going to gather more information about the solution. What are we going to do to make sure that we can solve this problem in the business environment? You're going to come up with details, analyzing that information to produce details of that solution, and then pass those details to the solution team so they can affect those details. They can do what it is that you said needs to be done to solve the problem. That's the requirements. The detailed specification of what needs to be done to solve the problem, effect this particular solution to that problem. Those don't exist. You can't gather them. You can only develop them over a period of time of gathering information and analyzing it. Taking the information that you've analyzed back, confirming it, that will raise more questions, get more information, analyze that information, raise more questions, get more information, analyze information until finally you have the solution and you have the requirements. Don't gather requirements. Build the requirements. After all, you as a business analyst are the one who owns the requirements. My name is Steve Blaise. These are the information that you can contact me. You saw the books. You can go to the book and read about this as well. And now we'll have Tracy come back and tell us what questions you might have.
Thank you, Steve. And yes, we're going to begin answering the questions that have been posted so far. And as a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in the attendee control panel. Steve, our first question, what are the document names we should be using for requirements? Too many people expect tons of them, and it gets confusing if you want to manage expectations that there is so much time.
Well, that's a broad question. I'm not sure of what particular mode you're in, so let me answer it across the boards. The requirements can be encapsulated, if you will, in a set of 3x5 cards on what are called user stories. If you're in an agile mode, Ron Jeffries invented the concept of user stories back in the mid-90s. So you have a set of user stories that specify the features and things that the business actually wants. As a result of, again, asking for information and analyzing that information. The user stories are high-level views of the features, exist on cards, not as necessarily as a persistent recording of requirements. And in fact, in Agile, specifically XP and FDD, phase iterative development, those kind of things, we don't consider that the user story is actual requirements, but it's a point of conversation. So I'll take a user story as a bank account holder. I want to view my account so that I can see that my deposits all went through. Now I'm going to, as the developer, talk about that, ask questions, again, to the business, and they're going to answer questions. So how do I know I'm a bank holder, bank account owner? What's the size of the bank account? How do I know the bank account number? How do I know what does recent mean? Where do I find the information? What do you want me to show? And where do you want me to show it? On the phone, on the desktop, a physical report? Once all of those are answered, I'm going to take those notes. I'm the developer still. I'm going to put it down on a piece of paper or something. Those are my requirements. That's what I'm going to follow to create the software that'll do that user story. Written in my words that I understand, my requirements to complete that user story. Now, traditionally, for the most part, the large majority of people, of companies not using Agile, use a business requirements document that states at a high level what the business needs in order to solve the problem. It's written in language that the business understands and can be a reflection of the implemented system ultimately. Some organizations also have a functional requirements specification, which is taking the what and adding the technology to it. For example, I need a website. Well, now we're going to talk about what we're going to do to get the website from a technological perspective. Then there's another set that business analyst usually isn't involved with, which is the system specifications. Those would be written by the technical spec, the systems analyst, and so forth. Those will get down to the names of the databases and the primary keys and that type of thing. Now, if you want to go to the standards, probably the standard in requirements or in this type of thing would come from the IEEE, kind of predates the IIBA, for example, and the PMI. And they specify 3 sets of requirements. The concept of operations, which is analogous to your business requirements document, the system requirements specification, which is analogous to your functional requirements specification, and your software requirements, which is your details. The system requirements specification is usually based on use cases. If I am going to estimate to management how much time it's going to take, I'm going to ask 2 questions. Who is going to get it and what do they want to see in order to do their job? And what is it that you want for persistence? If this is going to the developers and the developers say, all I need is this, that's all we need to deliver. If they need to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley or something, certain documents, then I'm going to know that. But I'm going to ask up front, what do I need to deliver and who is it going to and what are they going to do with it? And what do they need to succeed in their goal? That's what I'm going to provide to them. Is there anything else you need for regulations? Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you, Steve. Our next question is thank you for such a relevant and helpful presentation. And then Akram asks, what techniques do you find the most effective in helping you to define the problem? For example, root cause analysis, process modeling, and pain points, etc.
First, gather the information. It's best, the more information you have, the better. As you're asking questions, typically of mid to high level management, because the lower level, the user level, usually is more familiar with symptoms rather than problems. So as you're talking to them about the problem domain, about what they're doing, you're going to hear many voices of problems. Now the problem is this. Many of them will start with the problem is this. I had 8 different problems in about a 5-minute conversation with a senior manager one time. I walked away and had a list of 8 different problems. Some were basic variations of the same problem, but 8 problems. Each one the manager thought was the real problem. So the first way of getting problems is to ask for them. Tip: don't ask for the problem itself. If you use the term problem, that is a defensive, causes defenses to come up. You want to ask for the problem without using the word problem. That way, you're more likely to get more information. From that information, then you can start analyzing. That's when you can start. You don't use root cause analysis until you start getting down to some problems that need to be looked at. Root contradiction analysis is another way of doing that. If you didn't have this problem, would everything work fine? There's a thing called the problem filter that I find extremely effective in determining what the real problem is, especially when you have multiple problems voiced from multiple different people. You can work your way through 6 questions that you answer that ultimately eliminates all of the possible problems, leaving you with one, which usually, probably 50% of the time, is not the problem you thought it was to begin with. Probably not the problem anybody thought it was to begin with. So the standard problems out there, the only thing that won't work is brainstorming and mind mapping and those types of things, because those are better for solutions, coming up with multiple solutions. The other ones you mentioned, the root cause, Ishikawa is a good one. 5 whys is another good one to get to problems. But the best one, ask for it. Hopefully that helped.
Thank you, Steve. We do have a lot of questions. So our next one is, what should be the initial preparation when we go to these information or requirement sessions?
You want to know as much as you can about the situation. And when I say as much as you can, there are two goals. One is, so basically, personally, you don't look stupid. But it's not bad to look stupid. Remember this when you're gathering information. People won't tell you anything if they think you already know. So if you look stupid, they'll tell you more stuff. So you don't want to walk in looking smart, but you still want to know enough to be able to understand what's going on. And that's the second goal. Make sure that you have enough background so that when they start talking to you, you know enough to put it together so that you can ask the next question. Beyond that, you don't need to know anything. You go in and listen naively so that you can get all the information they get. The more information you have, the better analysis you can do, the better the results will be.
Thanks, Steve. Our next question, how do you gather information on a greenfield project, i.e. a completely new project, when the business is not sure what they want?
There are still those around. I cut my teeth. I mean, back in the 1960s when I started writing my first line of code, everything was greenfields. And how did we do it? What are you doing now? Ultimately, there's really no real thing. As I found out, there's no real greenfields. It's greenfields in terms of putting it on a computer. It's because it's never been on a computer before. But somebody who's already doing it manually, or somebody was already doing it somehow, thinking about it, whoever comes up, I think a brilliant idea, we ought to do this. Well, they're thinking about it. So let's talk about it. What is it that you see? How do you see this happening? What else might happen? Could we do this and do that? So even at Greenfields, there's somebody who has a vision of what is going on. And most Greenfields are actually based on systems and operations, procedures and functions that are actually happening, just not on the computer. Or not on your computer. Somebody else might be doing it, and your company has never done it before. So you go elsewhere.
Thank you. Steve, our next question, what is the best way to capture the information during an information gathering meeting, i.e. in raw form before analysis? Should one use a template with pre-written questions or just capture things in a free flow notes form? And do you keep track of exactly who said what?
Okay, it's not, I'll start backwards. You can take that obligation and requirement off the table. It isn't really necessary at this point when you're gathering the information to know who said what. You're just looking for general information. Now, one of the things about requirements that is said is that you have to have a source of the requirement, and that makes sense. You know, if something changes and the requirement is affected during implementation, you want to be able to go back to the person or persons who asked for it and say it's not going to happen or we have to change it. But you can certainly have the source being a meeting. So it might be interesting to know who asked for what from a political standpoint, but it's probably not a good idea. You want to have, so if you've got the vice president there and some other people in the same room all asking for things, having the vice president identified is automatically going to put a bias in how you analyze it because you're going to kind of analyze in favor of the vice president. It's better, first of all, not to have the vice president in the room with the rest of the people anyway, but it's better not to identify the sources in the room, and that makes it easier for you. Now, how best to gather the information? With a tape recorder. Put your, get your phone, put it down there, tell the people we're going to record this because I can't remember everything. I get away with it probably easier than you because I look like I can't remember anything with my age. So I can say, yes, I'm not going to remember anything, so, can I record this? And I rarely, in the past, that was a big issue, but rarely nowadays is that an issue. And now you've got all the raw information. Now, I want to advise you here, another technique. If you are going to record it, still take notes. And this is why. Imagine that you're sitting across from me and I'm asking you questions and I'm just sitting there nodding and so forth. You're going to give me information. But if as you're talking, suddenly I stop and I start writing something down, your brain is going to say, hey, what I just said was important enough for him to write it down. That makes me feel good. You got a little your benzocaine starts flowing, and you get some good stuff, dopamine up there, and you feel good about that. Hey, he liked what I said. So what are you going to do? You're going to get more information. You're going to try to get me to write more stuff down, all subconsciously. You, the interviewer, will get more information simply by writing things down. And here's the funny part. If you have your notebook in front of you and you write down things, they will give you more information because you're writing it down, even though you're tape recording it. Even if you're writing down, don't forget to get the milk and the bread and the cheese tonight on your way home. Doesn't matter what you're actually writing. The fact that you look like you're copying down what they said, you think what they said is so important that you want to make a note of it, will make them feel good and want to give you more information. Best practice, record it so you can't miss anything, and you can listen to the whole thing later at your leisure, shut it off, make notes, turn it on, and so forth. Tip, still take notes.
Thanks, Steve. Our next question, what's the difference between market requirement, product requirement, and business requirement?
Probably nothing. Ultimately, what you're looking for as a business analyst is to analyze the business to produce requirements for change. The market requirements are requirements that come from the marketplace for products. So if you're a product manager, you're looking for the market requirements so that you will change the product. The product requirements are what goes to the requirements. This is what I need to produce. I need a phone that folds out and makes a larger phone. I need a folding smartphone, a flip phone, but when I open it up, it's a smartphone. So let's produce one. And so the market requirements then are how much can we charge for it? How about nearly $2,000? Will that sell? So the market requirements tells you what we can sell it for. The product requirements is what this product needs. It may be fitting into a product line. Can't think of the name of the company. The Galaxy people just came out with like 4 more Galaxies that fit into the product line. Those are product requirements. Ultimately, though, they're all the same. You think of requirements. You're thinking of something that has to be done to effect a change. I need this change. I need this problem solved. I need to add value to the organization. These are the things we have to do in order to do that. Develop a new product, hit a new market share. It's all requirements.
Thanks, Steve. Our next question. Oh, sorry, and I just lost it. How would you handle a scenario where the root cause of the problem expands beyond the scope, budget, timelines of the project?
That's kind of contradictory. The root cause narrows things down rather than expands, but I see what you're saying. It's simple. There's a simple technique for doing this. You're going to come up with a problem, regardless of what somebody told you is the problem, or more likely told you what the solution is. That's what typically happens. You're given a solution along with probably a deadline and a budget and say, get this done. Now, we need this. A need is never a problem. So when a manager or a vice president or my client says, we need this, my first question is, why do you need it? So why do you need that? Eventually, we'll get to the real problem. Now, the technique is, I already mentioned this earlier, take that problem that you have defined as a result of analyzing a large amount of information back to the person who started this and say, is this still the problem you want to have solved? By doing that, that person will realize the problem wasn't that symptom that he described earlier, but rather a real endemic problem. It may be, in fact, way more than they anticipated doing anything about. And they may decide that instead they're going to live with the problem or they'll just patch it. It's always their choice. They're the business. We don't have any authority as business analysts. We ask them the question, is this the problem you want solved? Is this still the problem you want solved? And we're always at risk, always, as business analysts, project managers, always at risk when we cannot say definitively, this is the problem that we're trying to solve.
Thank you, Steve. I think we may have time for one or two more questions. So what is the best way to communicate technical or database level requirements to the business if that's something they want to know?
Very carefully. Okay, we had an entity relationship diagram. We're building entity relationship diagrams. That's pretty technical data stuff. For this company, Cable and Wireless, and it's no longer in existence, so I can use their name. Management wanted us to review the entity relationship diagram with the users. We said, do you really want that? And they said, yes, we want them to see all of the stuff you're doing so they can approve it. So we put up had the entity relationship diagram, put it up on the whiteboard because we didn't have PowerPoint at the time, and not that that would have made any difference. And we got blank stares. And what happened was, in an hour meeting, we probably spent 15 minutes of that hour explaining what the diagram meant. It was basically somewhat useless. It did have the advantage that when they saw the technical stuff, they had a lot more respect for what we're doing. Oh, this is really complicated stuff. No wonder it's taking them this long. I think that what I would do, and what I've done since, is say, what is it that you understand and what is it that you want to know? Do you really want to know entity relationship diagrams? I'll be more than happy to show them to you. Do you want to know a class diagram? Do you want to know how a many-to-many relationship is resolved? Or do you really want to know how this is all going to work? Ask more questions. You are business analysts. Your bread and butter is to ask questions. If you don't spend a day in which 40 to 50% of the time you're asking questions, you're analyzing, which is good too, but you're still going to ask questions even when you analyze. So when somebody says, I want I want to see the technical stuff, you're going to ask questions. Well, what is it that you want to see? Why do you want to see them? So that I can give you the right information at the right level. Explain to me what it is that you wish to see and get out of my showing you the technical. And you do it. You don't challenge them. You just do it. You know, how can I help you? What can, help me help you. Tell me what it is that you want with this technical documentation, and then I'll be able to explain it to you appropriately. Does that help?
It does, Steve. And we're almost at the top of the hour. Did you have any last words before we end the session today?
Well, let me just repeat. As a business analyst, your degree of success is measured by how much value you give to the organization. If you simply gather the requirements, you're not adding any value to the organization because they could do that without you. They already have them. You want to gather the information, and you do that by asking questions, asking more questions, and asking more questions. Gather information, not requirements.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Steve, for such a great session today. And thank you for everyone attending today's Modern Analyst webinar. I'd like to remind everyone that today's webinar, along with the slides, will be archived at the modernanalyst.com website within a few business days. And this concludes today's event. Thanks, and have a great day.